and welcome to a cover story conversation. I have with me one of my favorite guests. He's an author, master storyteller. He's written 15 fiction books. He's also written books on, on non-fiction books, 13 steps on various, on wealth, on love, on just little notes and anecdotes. He's also a columnist. But Ashwin, good to have you back with us. And it's been a while since we spoke. I have your latest book with me, The Ayodhya Alliance. Not so late because I'm a year late into it, but we're speaking after a year also.
Yeah, but first of all, Priya, with you, it always feels like just a conversation between friends,
I would
and
agree.
that's why I
Yes.
always look forward to coming on your program because there's literally zero effort in terms of being able to spur topics of interest. Number one, so I'm very grateful for that. And number two, yes, the
Thank you.
Ayodhya Alliance is out. It came out a couple of months ago. And so before we start the conversation, let me get this out of the way. Let me do my
Sure.
Besharam marketing spiel, which
Nay,
is that
please do.
there is this wonderful spot which you can visit on the banks of the Saryu Nadi. And there is a park out there which is known as Ram Katha Park. But a part of that park, a couple of acres, has been cordoned off, and that is known to the locals as Korea Park. And outside, you would find that there is a memorial slab which indicates that the park is in honor of a lady by the name of Queen Hyo Wang Hok. And she was a Korean queen who married a king from Korea. His name is Kim Suro. And this particular queen traveled from Ayodhya in order to marry Kim Suro. Her name was originally Suri Ratna. And
Acha.
apparently, this story takes place around 2000 odd years ago. And obviously, this was very, very fascinating to me. I just completely sort of, you know how I once a particular story strikes me, I'm like, no, मुझे इसके बारे में ज्यादा पता करना है.
Ah.
It became like that. And then I suddenly realized that there were other linkages which I hadn't thought about. So, for example, outside the tomb of Kim Suro, you will find the motif of twin fish outside Kim Suro's tomb in Korea. But you will find that same twin fish motif also on the ancient Pandyan flag. And they were great mariners and they traveled to places like China and Korea all the time. And what is even more fascinating is that आज भी अगर आप अयोध्या जाएंगे, यूपी जाएंगे, and आप policeman का badge देखिए, then the state's insignia is two fish.
Oh.
So you will find that this motif
Ah.
reoccurs in multiple time periods in multiple geographies. And then, of course, there is the fascination that there is a Korean legend by the name of Samguk Yusa, which
Ah.
was written, which was written sometime probably around the 13th century, 14th century, which refers to this story of this queen who went from a place called Ayutthaya and
Okay.
went to Gyumgwan, to the Garak Confederacy, where she married Kim Suro. But what is even more fascinating is the fact that if you go down south, then the region which is now known as what we refer to as Kanyakumari, in some of the works, it is also referred to as Ayutthaya. So then the question arises that was Ayodhya what we now call Ayodhya? Because at that time, Ayodhya was called Saket. So was it Ayodhya or was she actually from the south? Because if you look at common words between Korean and Tamil, you will find a huge overlap. So, for example, father and mother are Amma and Appa, both in both languages. Or grass is pul in both languages. Or day is nal in both languages. Or zero is onu in both languages. So there are many, many overlaps.
We discovered it first.
Yeah, so a couple of thousand words are common between the languages. And then, of course, there was the kingdom, what was that at that time known as Suvarna Bhumi, or Thailand, what we now know as Thailand. But that also had an ancient kingdom of Ayodhya. So the question that arose in my mind was that was she from one of these other places, or was she originally from Ayodhya, or did she have a connection to more than one place? And how did this story evolve? It's a fascinating journey across 125,000 words, and stretching the last chapter of the book goes back 2.5 million years. So you can imagine the expanse of this story. But I've had a lot of fun writing it, and I hope that my readers will enjoy reading it.
Oh, it is excellent. In fact, I should have pointed out to how much fun I had reading you is the bookshelf behind me. I don't know whether the light
Oh
catches it
wow!
as
Yeah,
much,
I
but
just
there are
I
so
just
many Ashwin
noticed. My
Sanghi
God.
books. I didn't have to
Virtually
go to
all
a
the
book.
Bharat series is lying behind you. Bharat series is genuinely my passion. And it
Mine.
is years and years and years of reading, distilled. उसका जो रस है, वो distill करके मैंने भारत series में present किया है. So I hope that eventually when you will get down to reading the Ayodhya Alliance, you will enjoy reading it.
No, I will. In fact, it begins. I read a bit of it, about it rather. I must say this last year has been a little last few months. But, it begins with Ravan telling Lakshman a secret, a technological secret, and that to save I think, a civilization, to save destinies.
Yeah.
An Indian businessman ties up with the South Korean this thing,
Yeah.
and they both go and they span, as usual with Ashwin's books, civilizations. It goes back and forth in time. So there is a mixing of, I won't call it mythology because there is history, there is fiction, there is science. I don't know what to call, what genre you write in, Ashwin, but you
And
have
actually,
everything.
frankly, Priya, somewhere along the way, even the usage of our words,
Uh,
I mean, the truth be told, in any case, in general, that is not to say that there isn't something called mythology.
mm,
Obviously, there are myths. Um, and very often we used stories which were fantastical in order to convey deeper truths, and that is where myth comes in. But I'm not too sure as to whether what we commonly refer to as our mythology is actually mythology, because I mean, to my mind, I don't believe that we would have written 300 versions of the Ramayana unless कुछ वहां पर कुछ actually ऐसी चीज हुई थी, something
yes.
had happened which was so great in its scope that people felt the necessity to retell that tale 300 times, or that
Yeah.
you had something which was known as a Jaya, which was around, let's say, 25,000 verses, and then over generations it morphed into something called the Bharat, which was 50,000 verses, and then that morphed into something called the Mahabharat, which was 100,000 verses. Now, I'm imagining that with every successive generation that passed by, some layering must have
Mhm.
happened. Some milch masala must have got added to those stories. But does that take away from the fact that something great must have happened in order for that story to have been told?
Hmm.
And so, to that extent, I keep wondering as to whether what we have is not necessarily mithya but satya, because maybe there is that deeper satya somewhere in it. And just because of the fact that usi diwal pe, on that same wall, there have been layers and layers and layers of plaster. So the original wall is now completely hidden.
And Satya is subjective, like for instance, in this book only, is Ravan the villain, or is he, he is also a
Absolutely.
great scholar and
Absolutely. So, what I find amazing is that, for example, when I recently took out a Insta reel and I talked about the great
yes,
accomplishments of Ravan,
I
and
saw
I
that,
said
huh?
that, look, he was a great scholar and he was a poet and he was a great Shiv Bhakt and he wrote the Shiv Tandav Strot. And in some ways, you could consider that he was a very, very learned person. And then I started receiving pushback from people saying, but I mean, after all, usne Sita ka अपहरण किया and he was a villain and all of that. I said, why is it not possible for all of that to be true? You can have a person who is very, very learned and is capable of even controlling Shani Dev, but is incapable of controlling himself.
Correct.
So, why is it not possible for multiple truths to coexist? I think that is
And
somewhere where I think sometimes we want to get into that compartmentalization and tunnel vision, as it were.
but you often have this, conversations on are you writing fiction versus history versus myth? I mean, and are you writing just fast-paced crime thrillers? You've also written two books, New York best-selling books with James Patterson. So, if I would ask you what genre are you writing, can you define it for me in one word or one line?
Maybe not in one line, but one thing I'm very clear about is that I am telling a story.
Ah,
And telling a story is not the same as writing. It is just not. It For me, a story means the shortest distance between two people. How can I reach you? How can I convey what I want to convey to you in a medium that will just be the equivalent of that? The equivalent of that is a well cooked khichdi where your body doesn't need to do any digestion. It's already perfectly made
simple.
for you. You know. Now, what is my role then? If you have a वो कहते थे ना कि खिचड़ी के चार यार what is that दही पापड़ घी अचार. So
अच्छा.
with
हाँ,
the
हाँ.
khichdi, what you need is those four things which add the twist to your
Hmm.
khichdi. So in that sense, what I'm looking to do is deliver to you that tadka, where it sort of I want you to. I don't want the you to be making an effort to turn the page. I want that page to turn. Uh, so you should feel compelled to turn that page as my reader. And if
I
I don't
totally
do
get what you're saying, having
and
read
if
your
I
books.
don't do that, then it's not your fault. There have been books in which are tough reads of Ashwin, like let's say the Rosabal line or a book like Keepers of the Kal Chakra. Those are difficult books. But what I hope for through those books is that the material is so intriguing that will probably keep you turning the page. Uh, but otherwise, what I'm really looking for is that with every page or with every couple of pages, there is something where you say, नहीं मुझे और पता करना है. I need to know more. And then you turn. And for me, that is the sort of reading which I've always loved. For me, it is what do I do? It's a 70-20-10. 70% I have to entertain you. Because if I
Hmm.
don't entertain you, you're not going to read it.
Correct.
20%, hopefully, like we right now spoke about, let's say, this Korea angle and Ayodhya Korea connection. So maybe
Ah,
you will come across some material which you weren't exposed to earlier. And that is where probably you become 20% richer knowledge wise by having read the book. And then 10% is really what I call the moment of enlightenment, where batti on ho jaye, and you suddenly say, you know what? I've gone through 100,000 words, I've read through 400 or 500 pages, but I never thought of this story in this way till the time that I've reached the last few chapters. It's that moment of batti on.
which hits.
So, so 70-20-10. 70%
Hmm.
entertain, 20% educate, 10% enlighten. That's all.
But I want to share with my viewers, I'm sure they all know, but those who don't, is that Ashwin never started out to be a writer. He just loved reading, he loved stories. He had a grandfather and a mother who, kept his interest in books alive. But he's an MBA, he's got a master's from Yale, and when he writes his plots, he plots them on a spreadsheet. I don't know how you do that. Excel sheet. But and his first book was The Rosabelle Line, which was actually by accident. I think you in Srinagar or somewhere, and you
Yeah.
ran out of places to visit and your tour guide took you there, And that's when it's, he sees something and it strikes him. So he's got a curious mind, like in Ayodhya, you saw the Korean connection. So that's what I like about his the mind. It's always thinking, always looking for new angles, and then the book just comes out. I'm going to take a break and come back, and I'm going to have Ashwin, I lured you in the false, not false, the right promise of talking about your book. But I also, you and I have some very interesting conversations about what is happening around us. The last time we spoke was during the Pran Pratishtha, and I can't tell you how much feedback I got. In fact, I'm sure she won't mind me sharing this. Lakshmi Puri, she's an author herself. She called me for your number after hearing what you said about, Ayodhya. So you're back to Ayodhya, about the Pran Pratishtha of the Ayodhya temple. So I'm going to come back and I have a few more questions linked to your books, but also what is happening around us. So stay with us. Hello and welcome back to a cover story conversation. I have with me ASHWIN Sanghi, master storyteller, columnist. And ASHWIN, we were talking about myth, fiction, history, and you said layers of history. We are living through one of those layers now because we've seen you've been writing since 2007, I think. So there's been a lot. We've seen what we thought as history is now being rewritten. People who we thought were told were villains are now being glorified. Like for example, Savarkar. Who would have thought that Savarkar, who was responsible for Mahatma Gandhi's assassination, part of the two nation theory, will now be talked about from the Red Fort. His portrait will hang in the parliament. So what do you make of this?
What I make of it is, unfortunately, first of all, by the way, I am one of those who believes that history in itself, unfortunately, can never be free, no matter which dispensation is there. But history can never be free of the narrator's bias. It just doesn't work. We are human beings and we all have certain inclinations, one way or another. I think it was George Orwell who said that he who controls the past controls the future, right? But he who controls the present controls the past. So, in other words, depending upon who is in control at a given moment of time, your narrative of the past is going to be shaped by that particular dispensation. Now, Priya, I have always believed that, unfortunately, history is one of the most abused sciences or disciplines that there is. My favorite definition of history is George Santayana, who said that history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, written by people who were never there. So, in that sense, it's a narrative, right? So you have, let's say, an event in 1857, which we grew up in our school days learning about as the Great Rebellion of 1857. We also call it the First War of Indian Independence. But just travel across the ocean to, let's say, the United Kingdom, and that is an event which is never taught in the history books at all, because the colonial past of the UK doesn't really figure into what is taught to kids. And even if you do eventually learn about it at college level, it will be taught to you as the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. So now the question is, it's the same event, but the lenses are exceptionally different, right? So the problem with an ideological bias is precisely this: that who was it who said that on the left there is nothing right, and on the right there is nothing left.
But we are sitting in the center.
Yeah. So what I am observing is that when it comes down to the left, then their favorite villain is Savarkar, who, as we were talking about Ravan, that there could have been a few things really bad with him, but there could have been also some great things about the guy.
Right.
And for the right, the favorite villain is Nehru, where I mean, again, there could have been lots and lots of things wrong with him, but there could have been some redeeming features in the man also.
Right.
So, point is that the moment you put on ideological glasses and then you want to look at it through that prism, then the narrative, unfortunately, becomes a one sided narrative. So, what I think is happening right now is that post 1947, because the entire education system was so tightly controlled by, in some ways, the left liberal, lack, for lack of a better word, left liberal intelligentsia of sorts, that now suddenly post 2014, the pendulum is not swinging to the center. The pendulum is swinging completely to the opposite side. Which means, in other words, that no, for 70 years you had your narrative. Now it's my chance to have my narrative.
Right.
Problem is that at some point of time you will have to have some sort of level of equilibrium. And this is the reason why I've always maintained that, for me, honestly, I would have liked to grow up learning about multiple versions of history. And the only way that you can learn about multiple versions of history is by reading a lot. And so, in that sense, for me, history means almost the equivalent of going in, not for a normal movie, but going for a 3D film where you put on a pair of glasses. But what's happening is that you don't have one beam of light coming to you, you have multiple beams of light. And then what your glasses are able to do is they are able to take those multiple beams of light and present them to you as a 3D image.
Got it. Nicely put.
So that is the way one needs to be looking at history. I mean, I guess maybe because I'm a fiction writer and a thriller writer, I'm always interested in the story behind the story. So when someone presents me a history narrative, my first question is, okay, but what's actually going on here? Which I don't think a lot of people ask. As a result of which, it's very easy to bash one side's heroes as villains. And that is where I hope that over a period of time, one will be able to arrive at the acceptance that, listen, everyone is not going to be black and white, but shades of gray. And
Correct.
being able to understand those narratives that, look, there were certain, like genuinely, for example, to my mind, I think Savarkar was way ahead of his times in terms of where he wanted to take Hindu society. Whether it was, I mean, today we may talk about, today, I think genuinely, I mean, I think this was a thought that was miles ahead of what people were talking about at that time. And similarly, when it comes down to, let's say, finding fault with, let's say, Pandit Nehru, that, oh my, he gave away large parts of China, and that he took he gave up on the United Nations Assembly Security Council seat, or that Kashmir would not have become such a big dispute had it not been for his mishandling. But then we also need to consider the fact that, listen, a lot of our democratic traditions today, I'm not talking about his daughter, I'm talking about Nehru particularly, that first 10 or 12 years was able to establish some sort of a foundation for a democratic framework. So, in other words, there is nothing all good and nothing all bad about either Savarkar or about Nehru. But they are our favorite whipping boys. And that's what we've done with virtually all of our historical figures. We've made them into cardboard caricatures of sorts. And depending upon which side of the ideological spectrum you are, you will decide as to whether you want to revere them or whether you want a garland of chappals around them.
And we're not just fighting over historical figures, Ashwin, we're also fighting over our constitution. In fact, I'm using 15th August as a peg to talk to you about your idea of India, as the kind of India that your idea of Bharat, as you would see it, as you would want it to be.
Well, this is such a wide expanse that you're talking about, but genuinely, I believe that obviously one would like to see in the coming years one would like to see India developing not only as an economy in terms of reaching much greater heights, not just in terms of aggregate GDP, but also in terms of per capita GDP. I believe that hard power, which is what, we are seeing this right now in the Trumpian world, that how relevant hard power is, whether it is economic power or whether it is military power. And even with military power, it's the quality of military power in terms of whether you have what it takes in terms of men and materials, which can be sourced pretty much internally, whether you have that sort of internal supply chain and leverage to be able to make all of that happen. So, so one part of it is hard power, but then the other part of it is also what Joseph Nye talked about, which is soft power. And I think that is a great, that is what, to my mind, defines us. But I'm a realist enough to know that soft power only works when you have hard power. There is no getting away from economic might and military might. Those two things are non-negotiable. But beyond that, I think that there is in some ways, whether it is, for example, let's say something like what is that? Butter chicken or chicken tikka masala. I mean, for all practical purposes, it has become the national dish of the United Kingdom. Okay.
Correct.
For example, you take Bollywood songs in the Eastern European or Central Asian republics, or even in the erstwhile Soviet Union, or you take the fact that there are multinational companies falling over themselves to create what are called yoga pants, and the fact that yoga emerged from here is not lost on anyone. But now you have 100 variants of yoga around the world.
Right.
So to my mind, I think when I talk about Bharat, I have always seen it as this arc of influence, an ancient arc of influence. Whether it is the fact that the largest Vishnu temple in the world was not located here in India, but was located in Cambodia, in Angkor Wat, which later on became a Buddhist temple, but started out as the world's largest Vishnu temple. Or the fact that even today you could go to a place like, let's say, Malaysia, and you have the Hikayat Seri Rama, which is the puppet dance, which is based on the Ramayana. Or the fact that a place like Afghanistan has a city called Kandahar, and where what is Kandahar? It is Gandhar. Where what is that character in Mahabharat, Gandhari? Or you go further west and you look at let us say the connections that you have two warring tribes, the Hittis and the Mitanni, and now you're talking about probably a few millennia ago, which is the present day land of Syria and Turkey. And you have warring tribes, and they are signing a document, they are signing a peace treaty, what Trump calls a ceasefire, as it were, that probably in ancient times, maybe there was an ancient version of Donald Trump who brought around 7 ceasefires around the world. So this was one of those. And but before they start talking about what is the actual peace treaty, they are invoking Vedic gods, whether it is Indra or Varuna and Mitra. So just imagine the expanse, this expanse, or the fact that you had ancient martial arts from South India like Silambam and Kalaripayattu going all the way to Shaolin through a monk known as Bodhidharma, or that you had two ancient Indian monks carrying Buddhist scriptures and landing up in China, and a temple is created out there called the White House Temple in Loyang, which you can still visit, which was provided at that time by the emperor to these monks so that they could translate the first texts from Sanskrit so that Buddhism could make its way into China. Or the fact that you have a monk called Bodhisena who lands up in the Japanese imperial court in order to create a new version of Buddhism, which is strongly influenced by Shinto. There are just, it boggles the mind that you look up into the skies and you have the twin stars which are based on Yama and Yamini, and then the Greeks adopt that and they say this is Gemini, or that you have a god called Varuna, and the Greeks love Varuna so much that they make him into Uranus. I mean, it is fascinating, Priya. And so we have always, but remember one thing, why is it that you had this great Vedic arc of influence? The reason you had this Vedic arc of influence is that you had a global share of GDP, which was probably upwards of 20-25%. So therefore, when your merchant ships were going, you could carry ideas, you could carry literature, you could carry art, music, culture, all of that you could carry, and you could win over people in a very, very soft way, because at the end, as you know, there was that old mafia saying, no, that it's easier to get things done with a kind word and a gun rather than a kind word alone. So you have the strength, but you don't need to use the strength, right? I think that is, honestly speaking, what we should be aspiring to. That where we are strong, but we don't necessarily need to use that strength because our soft power gets us through.
Oh, that is so well said. I'm out of time, but I want one more quick question from you is, there's also this, I don't know if you want to wade into this debate on, secularism. People are saying that we were always secular. The word was added later on the constitution. But the other point being that Hindu Rashtra was not part of the constitution for also for the same reason. So where would you weigh in on that debate?
Well, to me, honestly speaking, first of all, I do have a bit of what should I say, an allergy to the word secularism, because that word has been misused.
Your face is so expressive.
It has been misused so badly, Priya. I purposely, first of all, secularism emerges from Europe, and it emerges at a time when the church was all pervasive. And so in that sense, it was that, look, we cannot have the involvement of the church in affairs of the state. So keep the church aside and let's not have that involved here. But the truth is that when we decided to become independent and we adopted our constitution, it is a fact that we did not use the word secularism in the preamble to the constitution, because every part of the constitution indicates that. In a certain extent, what we were talking about was not secularism. What we were talking about was equidistance from multiple faiths. In some ways, in fact, this is a country which has not looked at tolerance. We use that word tolerance, no? But there is a huge difference between tolerance and respect. So I don't only need to tolerate you, I need to respect you. And I need
don't
to
patronize me. Correct.
Yeah. So, but what did we do after that? We decided that no, the state will get involved in the running of Hindu temples, or that we will extend Hajj subsidies, or that we will do everything that is possible in order to tax these temples, in order to bring revenues into the government coffers, and then it is no longer our responsibility as to how those monies or the revenues that have been collected, how they are going to be ultimately used, whether they are going to be used for the community or whether they are going to be used for a wider purpose.
Got it.
In some ways, it was fashionable for the better part of the early years post 1947 to go and seek votes from the Imam of Jama Masjid. But on the other hand, if you try to do that and seek the votes of let's say the Shankaracharya, you would have a problem, because then you would be called communal. So in other words, जिसे कहते हैं ना दोहरा मापदंड, we have applied double standards, and I think what you're now seeing is a fatigue factor. That look, please stop this. If you say that we are truly going to be equidistant, then just get out of the entire realm of religious activity. Or otherwise, then if the dispensation happens to be a dispensation which is proudly Hindu, then what is it that they are doing which is different to what has happened over the last 70 years? So it has to be one way or the other. But this hypocrisy, I think today, for example, if you look at the world around you, what is our problem even with the global order? We are saying, hey, listen, you are imposing tariffs on us, secondary sanctions on us, because purportedly we are financing Russia's war in Ukraine because of our oil purchases. But you are not willing to consider the fact that the largest purchaser of gas is Europe itself, or that you are not willing to consider that the largest purchaser of oil is China. And but because you feel that we are an easy target, so go ahead and impose your tariffs. So I think that is precisely the sort of thinking that, listen, you've always adopted a double standard. There's been double speak in this whole regard. So I think at least where I'm coming from is that today, if India, quote unquote, and I'm using the word advisedly, if India is secular, then it is secular because it is fundamentally a Hindu nation. Now, I'm going to get a lot of flack for it, but that is the very essence of Sanatan. Because when we look at Sanatan, it is one of the very few sort of faiths where you don't have a single church, you don't have a single book, holy book. There are multiple holy books. You can have 33 kotis of gods that you worship. I may decide to be a vegetarian. You may decide to be a non-vegetarian, an omnivore. Even within us, there are people. Someone will worship a rock. Someone will worship a mountain. Someone worships a river. We can have 300 versions of that Ramayana, but my version doesn't necessarily have to be more truthful than your version. All those versions can be pretty much there. In my puja, for example, I don't only have Hindu gods and deities, but I can also have Guru Nanak, and I can have Sai Baba, and I can even have Jesus Christ down in the south. There are temples which have Jesus Christ on the facade of the temple. So, in other words, we are absorbers. We can absorb cultural influences and ideas as they come. You can absorb the Buddha into your own view of Hinduism by making him the ninth avatar of Vishnu. You assimilate, you absorb. Vasudev Kutumbakam, what is it? Ultimately, the fact that there is interconnectedness. And that not only human beings, but every living creature, every inanimate creature is part of that same web and that same network. Now, when you have this sort of a thought process, then how on earth can it not be respectful towards an alternative viewpoint? I think what has really worked against us over many, many generations and many years is when you want respect from me but are not willing to offer respect to me. I think that is something which really we do need to deeply look within ourselves, that if you're going to continuously have, let's say, missionary activities going on where the demographics of entire areas are going to be altered. On the other hand, we have not been much of sort of a religion that goes out to convert. So then, obviously, it begins to reflect in terms of demography. You look at what happened at the time of partition. What was the demographics of, let's say, Pakistan or Bangladesh at the time of those regions having separated out? And then you look at what has happened after that with the demography of India. So the point is that these are things which are not hidden from anyone. So I think where what India is coming to is basically saying that, listen, we want to respect everyone. We want to respect all religions, all faiths, all points of view. But now I think this generation is now saying we also want that same respect back.
That is so well put, Ashwin. I mean, I don't know what to say. It's really well put and well explained. And I think that's part of, what that passion comes across in your books also. I think you should also add speaker to your title. You really explained it so eloquently. And I'm really the tyranny of time. Otherwise, we would have carried on. But thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Priya. Always a pleasure. And thank you for being such a consistent reader of my stories. I'm most grateful for that, as well as your constant source of love and affection. Thank you so much.
No, I read your books and then I sought you out because I loved them. I fell in love with the books. So
thank you, Priya.
Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.